What's going on, YouTube? So in season 2 there are a ton of buffs to the lovely Viessa. Before we go into the buffs, I'll go into the base Viessa. I'll move on to the buffs and then I'll move on to builds. Base Viessa has a passive called Ice Sphere, which whenever she inflicts Ice Shackle, which is that little rotating thing above their hit points, you will acquire 3 floating ice spheres on top. However, it is important to note, you'll notice if I hit the ground with the ability and inflict Ice Shackle, I get nothing. And on a direct hit, I get the 3 ice spheres. You only get the ice spheres on a direct hit due to the fact that the Ice Shackle that it inflicts on an explosion damage is level 1, and then on regular damage, it's level 2. You'll notice on the cooldown and the trigger condition, it says level 2 Ice Sphere. Whenever you inflict level 2 Ice Sphere, you will get 3 of the spheres, or Ice Shackle. Now you will notice next to all 4 of her skills is the little hexagon window for her passive. This will indicate the cooldown for those ice spheres. The first ability, Frost Shards, is a simple ice missile. You shoot it, it deals damage on contact, and then it deals damage on explosion. On contact, you get level 2 Ice Shackle, and then you get the sphere. It has a radius of 3.5 and a max expandable range to 250%. Whenever you have a max expandable range, this is the highest range you can acquire. If I go into the abilities and I put on a skill extension and a maximize range, you'll notice 186%. This would put my final range at 286%, which is overclocking the maximum amount of range that I could have. So I do not need maximize range when 192% will get me just enough. There is another module called Amplification Control, which adds 50% of the range, which in this situation, that is what that module is for, but I would not equip that on Viessa, just simply because I'd rather have something else. The second ability, Frost Road, now has shield recovery 3% per second. This just means in 60 seconds, you will have acquired 180% of your shield recovery back. It also now gives you a 40% movement speed increase, as well as leaving a frost puddle on the ground that inflicts Ice Shackle. Now, the Frost Road doesn't do any damage in of itself, but it does inflict Ice Shackle and give you your floating spheres. The third ability, Cold Snap, is going to do a lot more damage than it used to do. For instance, sporting a hefty skill power modifier of 3,200, you also get Ice Shackle and your spheres on Cold Snap. Her final ability, Blizzard. This is a little tricky. On cast, you actually get 2 ticks right off the bat. You'll notice 2 numbers pop up. One icicle coming up. And here it is again. Those 2 numbers that pop up are just double ticks on the cast. Then every 1 second, it used to be 2 seconds, but now it's 1 second, so it has effectively doubled the damage over time, and now the burst damage is 2,700, and it used to be 1,800, increasing the damage done on that. Now I'll go into Viessa's Transcendent modules. So she has quite a few Transcendent modules, but I do believe there are only 2 that are worth using. I do have to give a small shout out to Cold Snap Watch because of its lingering capabilities. If you're going to build a debuffer, I do believe Cold Snap Watch is the best module. However, I do not think that in this current stage of the game, we need this. Old Cohesion takes your 3 spheres and instead gives you 5 spheres. Stay where you are. Now, the only problem I have with this module is that If you build your cooldowns fast enough, you end up with the capability to not need this module at all. So if you are building a short cooldown build, which Viessa is best with a lot of cooldown, Cold Cohesion I do not think is the play. Another one is Glacial Cloud. This just yeets her ultimate like a grenade. There are some use cases for this. For instance, if I wanted to cast her ultimate, I would have to go into the ability, snapcast it, and then have an animation, and a whole bunch of stuff inside of my damage rotation that could go wrong. Hypothermia takes the damage that your ice sphere would do, and instead of just freezing them, it creates damage over time. So instead of debuffing, you're focusing on more of a dots character. You can see and hear the ticks that are cycling. That is due to Hypothermia's Ice Needle. The Ice Needle, you can find all of the skill power modifiers there, and they do tick in an interval of 1 second. I do think that if we ever run into a lot of super high health enemies that just take a long time to kill, Hypothermia will see more play, because not only does it do damage over time, but it also does debuff the targets. The only problem with Hypothermia, and the reason I don't run it, is because it lowers the skill power modifier of Blizzard, Cold Snap, very substantially Cold Snap, and Frost Shards. Frost Shards actually get an increase from Hypothermia, but it does not warrant actually playing it after removing almost a third of the damage off of Cold Snap. So I do not run that module either. The next two modules is what everyone does use. Cold-Bloodedness switches the Frost Road into a Cold-Bloodedness effect. The Cold-Bloodedness has two abilities. One, it decreases the MP cost of all of your skills by 20% and reduces the cooldown on all of your skills by 20%. So if I were to build a maximum character cooldown build for Viessa, I would have around 70% and then maximize my cooldown, and that would end up looking like this. You proc the buff, and then you can just snapcast your first ability. The second ability has an impressive cooldown, and you would just simply cycle your damage like this. That is the effectiveness of Cold-Blooded. The downside of Cold-Bloodedness is that it gets rid of your Frost Road. You cannot recover your own shields, and you do not have a movement speed increase anymore. Then the next ability is Absolute Zero. I do believe Absolute Zero is the best one, and I believe that for several reasons. One, the ice spheres that you get, their skill power increase goes from 250 to 478, heftily increasing the amount of damage. And in addition, you will notice on here that there is not a critical skill hit increase, and whenever you equip Absolute Zero, you will get the skill critical hit rate increase of 20% on critical hits. This will increase your critical hit score overall, and on a well-built Viessa, this will put it into the 80s. The secondary benefit of Absolute Zero is that it turns all of your abilities into singular, offering you a lot of synergy in your build. So you only need one reactor to increase all of the damage of all of your abilities. Frost Shards now comes with 997, which is roughly a 25% damage increase on Frost Shards. The Frost Road increases into getting actual damage onto the effect on the terrain. Now you have a skill power modifier of 249%, and you get to keep the movement speed, and you get to keep the shield recovery. The third ability, Cold Snap, loses a little bit of damage, going from 3,247 to 3,194. This is inconsequential in my opinion. And then the Blizzard effect goes from 1,400 and 2,700 respectively to 1,500 and 2,875. This, in my opinion, is a better module, although if you are speed running, I do believe that you can get more damage faster out of Cold-Bloodedness simply because it allows you to cast your spells in this manner. You cannot do this because it is very hard to get the 90% cooldown using absolute zero. However, you lose a lot of survivability, a lot of maneuverability, and a lot of utility whenever you're not using absolute zero. So I still prefer absolute zero as an overall build, but Cold-Bloodedness can have its place in the bossing dynamic, in my opinion. This is what a typical damage rotation of absolute zero would not look like, because you can snap cast all of your things using Cold-Bloodedness. And then on absolute zero, you will see a somewhat smaller damage rotation due to the lack of being able to snap cast each of your abilities whenever you want to. However, the cooldown of each ability has its own merit. As far as components go, I do believe there are 3 options. First is the newly appointed Hunter set. The Hunter set has kind of an issue in farming in that you can only get basically 1 out of every 10-minute run. It is kind of a slog to farm the Hunter set currently. I do believe they will change it, but this comes with a ton of MP recovery. MP recovery in combat is 0.12, MP recovery out of combat is 1.03, and when current MP falls 50% or below, you activate Arc Shield, which has a cooldown of 5 seconds and decreases your firearm attack, but recovers your MP by 30%. You'll be able to see it here. And then the cooldown of which you can see on the left side of the screen next to the Frost Road cooldown. And that looks like the Arc Shield. Then whenever you are hit, that is when you recover your MP by 30%. Unfortunately, I cannot show you in the training yard because you can't get hit in the training yard. Now, the 2 builds that I would say, if you are interested in speed running with Viessa as a boss runner, this is the build I would recommend, which is the Cold-Bloodedness build. If you have the Cold-Bloodedness build, I highly recommend the gun Blue Beetle. Blue Beetle has since had a buff. My Blue Beetle is not built, nor do I intend to build it for the characters that are going to use this gun as a stat stick, because why would I shoot an enemy with the Blue Beetle when I can just shoot them with a Blizzard? Now the Blue Beetle has increased the skill critical hit rate of 115% at 100% chance after casting a fusion skill. This is very important, as if you are using absolute zero, your fusion skill is only going to be on Cold-Bloodedness. So Cold-Bloodedness is good for a lot of damage really quick. I wouldn't say it's very sustainable, and it's not really replenishable in its hit point reserve stats. However, whenever you're using absolute zero comes with its own skill critical hit rate increase. So you don't need Blue Beetle, although it would be nice to have. If you are going to use absolute zero, there are 2 guns that I do believe are worth your time. The 2 guns are going to be Clairvoyance and FrostWatcher. Clairvoyance, leveled up all of the way, will give the enemy that you're shooting against a debuff. This debuff increases the damage that your chill does simply by reducing the enemy's chill resistance. The only problem with that is, even if after you fully build it, the duration only lasts for 2 seconds, so you would essentially have to snapcast your skill and then keep the chill resistance debuff locked in on target. While on absolute zero, this is completely feasible due to the fact that you can't really spam your skills all the time without eventually running out of mana. The other weapon that I would like to showcase is in fact FrostWatcher. I do believe FrostWatcher is a better choice, but that is it comes with some downsides, I would say. FrostWatcher has 2 abilities. One, Sub-Zero Sensation, where whenever you shoot a weak point target far away, you get a 30% trigger rate to get 32% increase in skill power for Chill Descendants. as another cold surveillance. However, cold surveillance is also very good because you can decrease their chill resistance as well. So you can do more damage using the FrostWatcher than you can with Clairvoyance. The only downside is that it comes with you actually having to aim, and the firearm critical hit rate of the FrostWatcher is very bad. So the first part you can't really rely on, but Sub-Zero Sensation you can trigger. They did 150,000 damage on a crit. You can see them. On a not crit, it does 40,000, and on a crit, it does 150. And with the buff activated, it does 172,000 and 46,000. This is roughly a 15% increase, not a 32% increase how you would suggest would happen. However, the way that it works is that this 972 has added a 32% increase, which you can see if you pause and you go into the stack. So currently you would be dealing 230% damage. So think about 30% divided by the 2 because your original damage is 200%. This is why it comes out as 15% more damage. Now to go into how the builds actually work. For Cold-Bloodedness, we have Strong Mentality and Maximize Conservation. These two are going to decrease the amount of skill cost so that you can constantly spam your skills over and over and over again without running out of mana. Unfortunately, we only have space for 3 critical hit modules on. We have Skill Concentration, Front Lines, and Skill Insight. You can put Emergency Measures on, although you would probably have to take off Strong Mentality to do so, which means it would decrease your longevity in the fight. So I prefer just having more longevity. Then we have Skill Expansion. This will give you a little bit more range to hit the targets that you actually want to hit, and to hit tertiary targets that you didn't expect to hit to begin with. For cooldown modules, we have Nimble Fingers, Focus on Chill, and MP Conversion. All of these stacked together will give you a 68% cooldown on your Viessa. That way, whenever you activate Cold-Bloodedness, you will add 20% to the 68%, giving you 88% total cooldown reduction. As a rule of thumb, you cannot go beyond 90, so it doesn't matter if you do or try, don't bother with it. Then, of course, we have increased HP. However, I can't see someone running shields on Cold-Bloodedness simply because you lose Frost Road if you are doing so. And then, of course, mid-air maneuvering, because who doesn't like to fly? Or at least pretend to. To showcase the new and improved Viessa, I will go in there with a Blue Beetle and slaughter thine Pyromancer. Keep in mind, whenever you are using Cold-Bloodedness, you definitely want to proc your fusion ability, which is the first ability or the third ability. Your final ability is Tech.
My shield is down. It's my turn.
And with a little bit of practice, you can do that no problem. However, that is not the module that I intend to use. And like I said, you can destroy some of your longevity for more crit by doing 2 things. One, you can take off Strong Mentality for emergency measures, giving you way more crit and way more damage. 2, you can take off the Hunter set and put on the Slayer set, giving you 26% more damage. If you did 2 of those things and then you went back into the Pyromancer, you can see yourself doing almost double the damage that you were doing before. However, your longevity wouldn't be as good, but you would still have a good time. A lot of people are really liking Viessa due to the new Colossus fight. She seems to be a very good matchup against him, simply because I do believe his resistance to cold is bupkis.
This is the ultimate chill.
But you just run and gun. Around him. This is essentially the strategy regardless of the build you use, regardless of the gun you use. You essentially want to just run around, not get hit, and shoot him with a whole bunch of icy abilities. And that was Cold-Bloodedness. I will switch to Absolute Zero. One thing about Absolute Zero that is just better is your movement speed, your ability for maneuverability, and of course shield regen. You can see my shield recharging itself currently. And this is how most people are soloing the fire crab with Viessa. The last thing you need to know that on each of these you will need a different reactor. Currently I'm using a singularity reactor because I don't want to bother farming for a really good cold-bloodedness reactor, simply because I prefer Absolute Zero in almost every circumstance. The singularity reactor or the tech reactor, which is what you would want if you were at cold-bloodedness, simply because of the ultimate damage. Unfortunately, you would not get that damage returned on your fusion ability. But either way, if you're going to boss, you want skill critical hit damage and attack when attacking on Colossus. Alternatively, if you are not bossing, the reactor that I prefer to run is skill cooldown and singular skill power boost ratio, simply because you'll get more coming out of singular than you will coming out of chill, because your chill is already so high. And it is hard to slot cooldown on the build once you are past a certain point. I have focus on chill here at 6%. If I wanted to give up energy collector, I could also put focus on singular. Focus on singular would give me 6% more cooldown and a little bit more damage, and I could see it being worth it. But MP recovery gives me so much more sustainability. I prefer it like this. In addition, I prefer running a little bit more survivability, so I have 1 increased hit point and 1 increased shield, because once again I can snapcast my Frost Road and increase my shield recovery by 10%. 10% is what it used to be. Now it's 1% per third of a second, or 3% per second. If you want to do more damage, you can take off the Hunter set and put on a Slayer set, but you will run out of gas fast. That is Viessa's build. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments. I'm sure someone will be happy to answer them. I did this video on Twitch. I do a lot of stuff on Twitch. If you're interested in my content, consider subscribing. Y'all have a sick day, and peace out.